If you're watching this video, you're probably in it for the long haul because there are hundreds, and I mean literally hundreds of blocks with a different texture to talk about. So to make things a lot smoother, I need to give you a bit of information before we go over them. So how this came about was Minecraft tweeted out that they have a beta going on for the new textures in Minecraft. So I put the texture pack on and I've lined up every single block and I'm going to compare them side by side. However, I need to point out before we start, none of these textures are absolutely final. In fact, some of them haven't even changed yet. This is just a beta. So any opinions or feedback that we give Minecraft will possibly affect if it gets changed or not. So that's very, very important to remember. Also, everything that I'm going to say is just my opinion. Being a big builder in Minecraft, I care about what every single block looks like. And I can tell you this, I am very excited about this change. I do think it is a positive one, and there are only a few blocks that I have a problem with. So, what we're going to do is go over all of the blocks now, and only when I have a more in-depth opinion to give will I stop and give it to you. Okay, so let's begin. So as you can see, the one on the top is the old textures. The one at the bottom is the new textures. These are perfectly synced up so you can see the difference between the two. Now, granite and diorite did not change, however the polished versions did. And one of the big changes on the diorite is the polished one looks a lot smoother and is quite a lot more usable. The same as andesite actually, it's very smooth and I would still use this exactly as I would now. Not that much difference. What I love about this update or this texture change is that so many of the textures have changed, but in such a subtle way that it doesn't really affect the game at all. Like, most builds will still look the same, if not better. There's only a few blocks where you will really notice the difference. And one of those for me is the wooden planks. All of these wooden planks have had such a very, very positive change. They all look so smooth and wonderful. When you use these in a build, they really stand out and they look fantastic. I cannot sing their praises enough. Bedrock doesn't seem to have changed at all, and sand has a very, very slight change I can get on board with. It just looks a little bit more smooth but still grainy. Gravel's had a slight texture change. A lot of these are very, very small changes. The ores have changed very slightly. It almost looks like they've just been flipped, if I'm honest. That is not a very big change at all. The logs have had quite a significant change to them. They just looked a bit more detailed. They've had a bit of a color change. Birch in particular has had a very positive effect. The jungle also looks quite nice. Sponge is now on its third change of texture. That is not the original sponge, and now it looks even more like SpongeBob SquarePants. Now the glass is the first block that I genuinely have a bit of a problem with. And I'm going to try and justify it. I'm not just going to say, oh, I don't like it. The reason that I don't like it is because of the way it sits when there's multiple bits of glass. When there's one on its own, it's kind of, you get it, it kind of works with the whole diagonal thing. But when you put loads of them together, you get a very odd repeated pattern, especially with this little bit down the bottom as well. Now I get it, without it, it would essentially just be a barrier block with an outline, and that's not what's needed. And to remind you, this is what it looks like without the texture pack on. So I'm not saying that this is much better. It's definitely one of the blocks that needs the most attention, but these diagonal lines here kind of blend in the whole thing. Whereas with the texture pack on, these lines here are really, really distinct in my opinion. And it's almost like I prefer the mess to this very repeated pattern. I'm not sure what the solution is. All I can say is, if you have a really large window on a build, this probably isn't my first choice on this one, I'm afraid. So let's continue. The lapis lazuli ore, it looks like it's just been flipped upside down again, so I don't know about that. The lapis lazuli block itself has changed, and I actually prefer the old one quite strangely. So the sandstone also looks pretty cool. It's just another mellow transition. They all look a bit warmer. Now the wool hasn't actually changed at all, so I'm just going to skip past all of these. I think this texture was recently updated, so there's nothing to change, obviously. Now the gold has had a major change. Now I briefly just want to talk about the gold block, because this square pattern is a very odd direction to take this. I honestly thought it would end up being more of just a clean, shiny metal. Same with the diamond in that respect. It's got this very distinct square pattern in it. And essentially what that means is if we want to use lots of it, it just looks a bit odd. But then diamond blocks and gold blocks were never really that suitable for building anyway. I guess I just thought that the texture change might change that, but it hasn't. So let's continue. The iron block doesn't seem to have changed at all, and upcoming is all of the half slabs, or just normal slabs, or whatever you want to call them. The stone slab seems to have a very minor tweak, and then most of these will mimic their full block counterpart, the most notable of which is the brick, which I'm going to come to in a second, and the nether brick looks cool, and the quartz as well. Now I want to stop and talk about bricks in particular, because they're amazing. This change has really suited this block. This was one of my least favorite textures because it was so bold. This one's just been made a bit more mellow, and it's got a bit more of an aged look about it, and this block is going to be used so much more because of it. Very positive change. So let's continue. The bookcases are pretty cool as well. The mossy cobble has had a really nice shift away from a slimy green to a proper moss, which is nice. Obsidian is meh. The diamond ore has a little bit of a glow about it, which is really nice. The same as the redstone ore. I think most of the ores have had that little bit of tweak around them. I briefly want to talk about ice because it is my new favorite texture. It genuinely looks like ice. And there's something about it, it's just absolutely beautiful. Very well done. So moving on again, we've got snow, which I think is a very nice texture change. Again, just smoother. Clay is just slightly different. The pumpkin is actually quite nice. It's got very much more firm look to it. Netherrack, much more pretty. Soul sand also. This glowstone is much warmer. The jack-o'-lantern is a little odd, but again, pretty cool. Now, none of these have changed, so we're going to skip through those. And there's a lot more blocks than you think there are in this game. So now we're moving on to the stone brick. Again, all of these have had a very subtle change that have really improved them massively. Contrast that to the melon, which has had a gigantic shift into a more realistic state. Not too sure how I feel about that one. Mycelium hasn't had a change yet at all. Nether brick has had a very nice but subtle change. It's a bit brighter. And the endstone looks a lot like cheese. All of those, again, very mellow but warmer changes. All of these slabs are wood that we kind of talked about earlier. They're exactly the same as their full block counterpart. Emerald ore, again, has had that little glow added to it. I think it's a very nice touch to do that. Emerald block was originally so ugly, but now this one is still not my favorite, but it's definitely an improvement, let's put it that way. Now, quartz on the netherrack is actually pretty cool. It looks like bones or ribs sticking out, opposed to the mess it was before. Quartz has had a pretty nice change. The pattern's shifted a bit. The clay hasn't changed at all, so we're going to skip through those again. And onto some more logs, which I think have had, again, a very positive change. Very subtle, very warm. I have placed these blocks in the order that they appear in the inventory, so that's kind of why they're a bit weird. Yeah, maybe they need to organize the inventory a bit better. All the prismarine has a similar effect, but very nice. I actually prefer the old dark prismarine. It's more subtle. I don't like very hard grid patterns. The hay is a very cool block. We've got a nice coal, very cool packed ice, and the sandstone, the red sandstone, is missing the wither actually. I think the wither is an excellent addition to that one. It makes it slightly different. So I think that's a bit of a thing that's been missed out. You know, I never really liked purple in the first place, so that subtle change doesn't really affect me too much. The end stone brick is pretty neat, but without staircases and slabs, it's not very useful. Nether wart doesn't seem to have changed. Nether brick does. It's like less shiny almost. The bone seems to have had a bit of an improvement. None of these have changed, so we're going to skip through these as well. I am going through these very quickly because there are so many to see. And the saplings, all of the saplings have had a fantastic change. They are seriously outdated textures for the most part, and these very simple saplings have had a major upgrade. Now, the leaf block on the left, the oak one, does look good to begin with, but I don't like it when it's on a tree, and I'll show you later on what I mean. The other leaves seem to have had a very positive change, and the grass also is a bit weird. The fern, don't really have much to say. The dead bush, an amazing change. All of the flowers, in my opinion, look amazing with their changes, and they've still got very nice, bright, vibrant colors, and that's pretty much what I use flowers for in building, is trying to give maybe dull or grey builds a bit of color. The mushroom blocks, very old textures, very original alpha textures. They've had a little change there as well, and I think they also look pretty cool. I can't actually tell if the torch has had a change. The chest looks very similar. The furnace does look like it's had a bit of a change as well. The ladder as well, a bit smoother. Cactus, pretty cool. Jukebox is a bit of a weird one actually. It's got more of a crisscross pattern now. And all of these are the monster stone bricks or blocks or whatever. So we've already gone over those, but again, all positive improvements. The iron bars is a very subtle one as well. The glass panes is a mimic of its full block counterpart. Again, not too happy with those. The vines is quite cool, especially when you've got a whole stack of them. And we're on to some of the more technical blocks now. We've kind of moved away from the building blocks. They're all subtle changes that mimic what we've seen in the past. The cobblestone wall and a mossy, again, mimics what we saw earlier, but again, very positive change. The anvil, it's got more of a smooth effect going on it. The top of it actually has a really nice cracked texture, but you can't see because of the angles. Sorry about that. The leaves, again, just another change. The slime block has actually had a pretty cool change as well. All of these have remained the same. I'm sorry, I didn't know which textures had changed and hadn't. All of these plants have had a very cool change, except, in my opinion, the double long grass. And that's because in vast quantities, it kind of turns and curves like a snake, and that kind of fights against the whole very blocky nature of Minecraft. And hopefully you can kind of see that later on when we go and have a look around some vanilla worlds. The end rod has had the purple bit removed from it, which I personally like. Now, in the replay mod, it didn't show all the different colored beds. For some reason, they all came out as red, so I'll just quickly go over it. It's just the same texture, but with all the different colored beds in them. They do look really cool, all of the beds. It definitely looks like they have an actual sheet over the top now, which is nice. Moving on to some more of the decorative blocks. We're not going to be looking at any of the mob retextures, although they are pretty cool. We're primarily concerned with the blocks, but you can see that they've made some changes through the mob heads, particularly the skeleton. Not so much on the creeper or the Steve head, but definitely some of the other ones have had some subtle changes as well. The dispenser has a more surprised face than before, and the slime piston actually looks like it has slime on it, not just green sludge, which is excellent. Now, the TNT is one that I briefly want to talk about. It's like a very quite violent shade of orange or red on the top of it, and it does make it bright, and I don't know how to feel about it. On one half, I kind of feel like it is very dangerous, like as a color, but then on the other hand, it is TNT and it is going to explode, so it really does fit. It gives the sense of danger that comes along with TNT. So overall, I think it's probably a good idea, but it is quite bright. Now we're on to some more of the redstone related items. The lever just has the cobblestone added onto it. Most of these will circle back to what we already have seen, such as the pressure plate is just a copy of the oak texture. However, the trapdoor is slightly different. It's got like a really dark shade around it and then a different shade on the top. The redstone lamp is something that I want to point out as a block that I'm not too fond of. It almost looks like it's plain. It's way too plain. It's like had its texture removed. I'm not a fan of that one. I prefer having a bit of substance to it. As for the rest of these are very similar to what we've already seen. The redstone block looks almost like it's been given a harsher texture. Everything else has become smoother, but this one in particular looks like it's become harsher. Unless it hasn't changed at all, in which case I'm going to have to shut up. The dropper looks amazing. He looks so happy. And then all of these wood textures, again, very smooth. I love the changes to the planks in general. Just absolutely fantastic. I cannot sing their praises enough. Definitely my favorite change. And the observer block looks cool. It's just had another facial expression tweak. These aren't blocks that I use typically, so they are just used as faces for me. The doors are very, very detailed compared to how they used to be. Very defined, especially the iron one. Didn't used to have these major dimples in it. And the redstone doesn't really affect me. I can't actually tell much of a difference between them. Perhaps nothing. The doors, though, much smoother. I do enjoy them. The birch one I feel could have had a bit more change to it. The other doors, though, are pretty cool. The acacia one is slightly disappointing. It doesn't really look like it's had much change to it. I don't like the doors with loads and loads of holes in them. It almost looks like prison bars, that one, unfortunately. The rails, again, this isn't a texture that particularly affects me. It just seems like it's had a little bit of a tweak. The minecarts, though, seem to have been made a lot darker, and they're almost very, very spotty, which is very odd because I always pictured them just being made out of just plain steel or metal or whatever. So the spotted texture on them is odd to me. The boats have been brought in line with all of the wood changes, which makes sense. However, the old boat was pretty cool. I mean, it's not that long ago that it got retextured. And then all of the minecarts, again, are just variations of the original. Now, the cauldron. And the last one that I want to give a bit more detailed feedback on is the cauldron. Now, I actually preferred it when it had a more smooth, matte finish to it. This little rim around the edge, it kind of just distorts any use for building, because normally we use cauldrons as like a base. However, it still works for certain things like a flower pot. In fact, it probably looks a bit better, but there's something about just having a clean, matte finish that I think I will miss on the cauldron one. There's only a couple left now, the brewing stand, which I think is okay, and the beacon, which despite me not liking the glass block earlier, I think actually works quite well with the beacon. Okay, so now this all means nothing if we don't view them in context. So before we go and have a look at some of the builds, I just want to take a quick tour of an overworld just to see what the changes look like to a normal vanilla Minecraft world. The first thing that stands out to me is the textures of the leaves. Something about them, it feels a bit odd. I don't know. See, look, I'm not an artist, so I don't know the correct words to describe how I'm feeling or visualizing what I see. From a distance, it looks great, but when you kind of get close, maybe it looks almost too detailed, especially compared to what it used to be. The birch is a bit closer to how I was imagining it. It's almost like the fact that the leaves are trying to be leaves in a way is kind of ruining the entire effect. So I'm not too sure actually on the whole leaves thing. As for the floor blocks, they all look fine to me. Sand looks fantastic. Everything sort of seems to flow very nicely, and nothing has changed without having some resemblance to what it used to be. The only thing that really kind of stands out to me at the moment is those leaf blocks, the oak leaf blocks. So I'm going to look back at some of my old builds and projects. This is an underground base that was made quite a while ago. And I've got to say, the new textures, they seamlessly merge into one. The andesite into the cobblestone, into the stone. This is a very common mix that we use. Even the mossy, it's just all very mellow. It really is quite warm is how I would describe it. Everything fits quite nicely. I'm very, very chuffed with how this has come out, actually. This looks fantastic. Nothing really looks out of place. And if I compare that to what it looks like without the texture pack, and it looks exactly like how we would expect, Minecraft to look. What we're trying to do is compare the two of them and see if it really does ruin anything, and I can't say that it does. The mossy cobble has definitely been a major improvement. The overall style of it, yep, looks the same. If anything, it just blends a bit nicer together. The wheat has changed, actually. That's quite a nice texture change. I didn't actually cover that. So the fact that it's entirely yellow without any of the weird sort of buds on the top, I think that's a very cool change. Here is a modern house that never actually made it into being a tutorial. But as you can see, using quartz has kind of changed. The texture of it perhaps doesn't suit modern houses as much as it used to. There's something about the texture that has altered the overall effect of it. And this is kind of why I wanted to take a look at some of my previous projects, because I wanted to see what works and what doesn't anymore, and maybe some things have to change in the future. And this is the whole argument against not changing the textures, is that it's going to ruin some of people's builds that they've made before. On the other hand, it also enables you to come up with even more great buildings because there are more textures that work together. So it's kind of a catch-22. This example, I'm not a fan of the quartz in the modern setting. However, the wood change has made a huge difference. This is a fantastic texture. It works super, super well. And this is how it used to look with the quartz. And I must admit, maybe I'm just used to it, having looked at the old one. It's not that good in the old one either. I must admit, snow would probably be my first choice for the modern texture, but now that there's white concrete, that definitely takes prevalence. In fact, I think this was built before white concrete was even in the game. And here's a build that I made for Halloween this year, and the texture changes have really benefited this one in particular. It looks fantastic, and I think that's mainly down to the really, really nice wooden plank textures. So that has really done a fantastic job here. All of the woods look nice. Oh, especially the new bricks. It really fits in nicely with this. But it hasn't changed enough to make it look any different to how it used to be. It's just changed the tone of it very slightly. And that's what I really like about this entire texture change. And that's pretty much everything that I have to say about this new texture change update thing that's going on. I really, really love it. I think this is a fantastic, positive change for the game. There's only a few textures which I'm really nitpicking at that I'm not a big fan of, and that might just be because I have a very strong bias towards certain ways of building, so my opinion perhaps isn't even that valid, really. I met the guy that has made all these textures, and I must say he's done a really, really good job. Now, this is obviously a beta, and what they're really after is feedback, which is kind of why I made this video. I wanted to throw in my opinion in the mix, but if you have a certain opinion about any of the blocks that are shown here, there is a link in the description to give your feedback on the blocks yourselves if you want to contribute. Only if you make your voices heard will any change happen. So thank you very much for watching, and I'm sorry that I didn't cover all of the items and the mobs. There are probably going to be plenty of videos that do that. I'm mainly concerned with the block textures because obviously this is a building channel and not so much a survival one. So thank you very much for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope my opinions weren't too strong or whatever. Thank you very much again. Good.